This funding, CBSA will regularly update normal values to make sure that duties accurately reflect current levels of dumping. Voici les principaux points du budget supplémentaire de défense de la.
Those are the main points of the supplementary budgets B of the CBSA. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I now open the floor up to questions. It's the first round. Ms. Stancho for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the officials for being here. Certainly, it's welcome to see you all. And we certainly have issues in our country facing that concern every single one of you, and we appreciate your hard work. But certainly top of mind has been the threat of the 25% tariffs from President-elect Donald Trump and the impact, or certainly related to the border security. So I would like to speak with Ms. O'Gorman on your department and the challenges that you're facing, in particular in between ports of entry. What efforts have you made in the last week to ensure that there's more surveillance beyond the ports of entry themselves?
So I can happily speak to the efforts of the CBSA when it comes to port security, and I'll say a few words and then defer to my colleague, the Commissioner of the RCMP, who has the mandate between the ports. But just to say, we work closely every day with our U.S. counterparts in terms of securing our shared border, and we exchange information with them. Operationally, we are embedded in their targeting centers, and we are awaiting an embedded officer from the CBP to come and join our targeting center in the near future. We speak regularly at the head of agency level, but more importantly, every day at the officer level. So I have recently, probably a year ago now, appointed an executive director, operational officer responsible for combating firearms, and a separate executive director responsible for combating opioids.
Thank you. If I may, the union president of the Customs and Immigration Union has mentioned that some of the frustrations for policing the border with our frontline officers is, just to quote him, he said that there is a situation is so silly, to quote him now, that if an officer, if they're sitting at one of the workplaces and they see someone crossing just off to where the port is, they have to call the RCMP. So it seems that there is frustration with our border officers that they literally are seeing someone go just right out of their jurisdiction and they can't apprehend them. Can you comment on those challenges?
Sure. I will say that that has never been raised to my attention. And so this was new information to me when I read it in the paper. And so as we meet with our officers at land and air ports of entry and marine ports, we often talk about the challenges, talk about how we can better support their work, move resources around to face the changing threats that they're seeing. It hasn't been raised to my attention. If that is an issue, happy to undertake the work that it would take to address any legislative constraints. That would obviously be up to Parliament to make any final determination there. So open to anything that makes us more effective at the border, but this is not something that I've...
Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. You had mentioned earlier that you are aware, of course, that the jurisdiction for CBSA is not in between the ports. That's the RCMP. So you are aware of those limitations, of course, and certainly we've seen reports from the U.S. Border Patrol about well over 20,000 people crossing between those ports of entry into the United States. So certainly this is an issue that is known in that regard. So to the Commissioner of the RCMP in particular, you've taken, of course, the RCMP has the responsibility between ports of entry. I have concerns about the limitation of our staffing numbers to police 9,000 kilometers of border without the CBSA supporting those efforts between the ports. I believe there's recently been an announcement that 25% of Atlantic Canada RCMP officers will be moved to the border. Is that a correct assessment of that announcement or that media report?
I don't recall positioning myself for the organization at 25%. Deputy Commissioner Flynn might have, but the important thing is to understand is we do have that surge capacity within the organization. We saw it in events with Roxham Road where we mobilized our folks from Montreal, some investigation teams to the border, and now these people have gone back to the respective units, and actually the people who are assigned to the border are actually covering more of the border now that nobody's coming into Roxham Road, so we can spread those people apart.
appreciate that very much, and certainly the RCMP officers and our border officers work very, very hard. and very grateful for their courage and dedication to the job. My concern is that the RCMP is facing staffing issues across the country, particularly in rural and northern Canada. So if the idea is to pull from those resources, would that not endanger, say, rural Manitoba, which I know my home province does face RCMP staffing issues, and we do have border crossers between our large many kilometers between our ports of entry in that regard. So wouldn't there be a concern for those local communities if those RCMP resources were pulled and put in between the ports?
It's well known the staffing issues that we're addressing right now. I would like to highlight the fact that I've been working closely with public safety and the minister to acquire new technology to reduce the impact on resources, so we can rely more on technology and reduce. I'm not going to say reduce the footprint, but use human resources accordingly to the latest technology that we have for the border.
Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Will there be more boots on the ground in the next 6 weeks at the border? More officers to help these efforts?
So will we be?
Correct.
So we're always, like I said, moving our resources around to where the threats are. So we have the ability to staff according to volumes, which does give us a flexibility. And there's an impact every time we move people around, potentially in terms of wait times, but we have established wait time commitments, and we can change those if the threat increases. So I'm not worried about our ability to move people around, and in fact, we're actively doing that right now, looking at potential risks relating to a northern border surge. We haven't seen those numbers increase at all at the ports of entry, but we have people who would be reassigned from where they are to be moved, and we do that every summer. So we do that on a regular basis.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Dancho. Ms. Zahid for 6 minutes. Ms. Dancho for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the RCMP Commissioner, you mentioned to my colleague from the bloc about that to pull any RCMP resources to redeploy from the border, the primary wave would be from federal resourcing rather than the contract policing or the community policing, so to speak. So how many officers are you preparing to redeploy to the border from federal resources?
So right now, we don't have any intelligence to indicate where the surge is going to be, if there's going to be a surge, so we'll have to wait for any announcements. But the organization has to be nimble enough to identify where these hotspots are.
I'm so sorry, I was not clear. Regarding the threat from President-elect Trump about the 25% tariffs because of the more than 20-odd thousand individuals who have crossed from Canada into the United States and the about 12,000 kilograms of various illicit substances, that seems to be their focus and their threat of really an economic recession in Canada. So my questions are, what is the RCMP going to do to redeploy their efforts to the border? Because as we've outlined, the CBSA does not have jurisdiction between the ports of entry, and the issue is between the ports of entry in your jurisdiction. So are you saying that there's no commitment, there's no plan right now to redeploy those federal resources right now?
There's contingency plans being built as to what units are impacted if we need that surge capacity. And I even went as far as we could even look at, depending of the situation, redeploying people, cadets, out of training, just like we did on Parliament Hill in 2015 or 2014, temporarily, depending on the surge that we're facing. But throughout the country, Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn, who's in charge of federal policing, is in lockstep with all the commanding officers. There's a contingency plan set for surge capacities.
Again, I'm not necessarily focused on of course, we are concerned very much about the surge that may come in from the United States, but for the purposes of what the Trump administration is threatening and the economic recession that they're threatening, they're saying right now this is happening. There was the people and the drugs coming from Canada to the U.S. is their concern. So my understanding that right now, with the status quo right now, which the Americans have the issue with, there's no plan if things remain how they are now to redeploy RCMP resources between the ports of entry.
The challenging part, Mr. Chair, with it is the offense is only committed when they cross the border, which is challenging. And again, it's going to go with the collaboration. There was an incident that happened just the 29th where 6 individuals crossed in Manitoba near Emerson. And USBP called us right away. We were able to locate the 6 individuals and whatnot. So there's collaboration, but I think, Mr. President, it would be really important to identify those hot areas based on the position that the U.S. will take.
I see. So what you're saying is you're not concerned about the individuals that are sort of approaching the border, and when they do cross border, that's the Border Patrol for the U.S.'s problem.
Well, if you go back to Roxham Road, it was the other way around. People were actually
Right.
lined up in the United States to come through Canada. So the offense actually happens once they cross the border, which is sadly enough. But again, it's more important than ever to have the right technology and the right partnerships south of the border, which the partnership with the USBP is very strong.
Thank you. To the CBSA, Ms. O'Gorman, then again, we're hearing concerns raised, as I mentioned, from Mr. Weber, the union president for our border agents, that the issue of the crossing, whether northward or southward, is between the ports of entry, and you are limited in your jurisdiction to do that. And the RCMP has outlined there's not any immediate plan to redeploy RCMP resources between the ports of entry to stop the influx into the U.S. from Canada, again, which is the primary concern of the incoming American administration. So what discussions have you had with the RCMP, if any, to expand your jurisdiction, expand the mandate of the CBSA to fill some of those gaps between ports of entry? Has there been any discussion? And again, I'll just point out that it's been 20 days since the new border czar, Tom Homan, flagged this as a major issue that he's going to have with Canada, that indicated this was going to be a problem. And of course, over a week ago, President Trump announced these very frightening tariffs and what that's going to do to our economy. So I'm just not getting a sense that there's any immediate action to deploy any new resources from the RCMP or the CBSA between the ports of entry, which is the issue with the Americans right now. I'm just concerned about that. Can you comment?
So a few things. We work with the RCMP every day in executing our respective mandates at my level all the way down to the front line. Our officers know each other. They talk to each other. Irregular migration has been steadily decreasing, not to say it's not happening, and certainly CBSA processes people who come and seek asylum through the air mode and the land mode every day. And I say that just to say we are implementing the STCA every day, which is to say people come from the U.S. and seek asylum into Canada, and we determine whether they meet an exception to the STCA, and if they don't, we return them, and the U.S. does the same thing. So I think it's important to note at the ports of entry, we are applying the STCA, and it's working. In terms of between the ports, certainly we share targeting information, share intelligence, and we work in integrated teams, the integrated border enforcement teams, which includes the U.S. And there's a BEST, and I will fail that acronym, I think it's Border Enforcement Task Forces, are also, again, on the U.S. side with embedded RCMP and CBSA. So, you know, whether we're stepping out to do patrols that we don't have the authority to do, but I'm satisfied that from an intelligence and information sharing perspective, we're doing it every day, all the time across the country.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci tout le monde de votre présence ici. C'est toujours apprécié de vous recevoir.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here, particularly the Commissioner of the RCMP. You talked about Roxham Road a while ago when you talked about the movement of employees. And reference have been made to a Radio Canada article that said that information was obtained from the RCMP in Légy in Quebec to make sure that each program will contribute 25% of its employees to the regular force to help work at the borders. And of course, all these follows threats that have been made by President-elect Trump to impose a 25% tariff on Canada. And also, Minister LeBlanc came out to say that border security was going to be reinforced. And this reminds me of the situation of Roxham Road. A lot of money was deployed there. What does it mean when you take agents from one sector to send them to the border? For example, at a time when just a few months ago we're talking about firearms control, there was a lot of illegal importation of firearms. Where are all these RCMP officers? We thought that they were all at Roxham Road to control irregular movements. We want to control the borders. That's a good thing. There are other solutions that could be used. But what does this mean for the RCMP officers who are being deployed from one place to another? Does this have other consequences on other fights that are being engaged? Thank you for the question. Of course, if we mobilize resources for other priorities, there are consequences. We are not different from other police forces, as Ms. Erin O'Gorman said. We assign resources according to priorities. For Quebec and Ontario, the mandate at entry points is controlled by the federal police, where the federal police is also present throughout the country. Let me come back to the question by Ms. Dancho, taking people from a detachment. The first wave will be to look at our federal resources, the first phase, before looking at contractual resources or frontline resources. The reality, as I said a while ago, is that there are priorities that are constantly evolving, so we must mobilize people in light of current priorities. Now, Ms. O'Gorman, one of the solutions that seem to be ideal is to allow border services to patrol outside border posts or between the border posts, as the RCMP may do. Yesterday, the president of the union sent a letter to Mr. Leblanc saying our members are ready to do the job required. They have the expertise required. There are different laws that exist to control that. But this is an order that was adopted in 1932 that prevents them from doing that. So it takes some political will from the minister to drop that order and allow border officers to go patrol in those areas and to go provide support at the border post. Have you heard that request from the union and from the employees? Do you think that is a good solution to safeguard our borders? Just like my colleagues, I am open to any solution that contributes to security, that's for sure. And I agree with Mr. Weber that our employees, our agents are ready to do whatever they need to do for the safety of our country. They are motivated and they work very hard every day. So if it takes a change in the law, as I said, it's up to the government and parliament to take those decisions. I would like to see an analysis of what has been observed, what it means now to have a mandate to do that job, and what impact will it have at the entry points. I think an analysis is important. Every day at the entry points, our employees are working to execute their mandate. Thank you.
Ah, il me reste une minute. Désolée, j'avais pas vu.
I have 1 minute left. I'm sorry, I didn't see that. We're hearing about security at the borders in the news recently. The government of Canada has just announced that they are working in line with the U.S. to adjust working hours at some entry points, and this has some impact in some areas in Quebec. Hours will be reduced from the 6th of January. I think we are sending out a contradictory message. We are talking about more agents at the borders, more money, but at the same time, we are hearing that service hours are going to be cut. When I put the question to the government, I was told that according to the figures, there were not many people going through some entry points, and that is why a decision was taken to reduce the service hours. We have figures, but they are not distributed. Well, I don't think you should have them with you right now, but could you send the figures indicating the number of people that go through the entry points, like child favor, for example, to know when people go across the borders? People talked about a few after 6 p.m. If you have those figures, please send them to the committee. Thank you. Yes. If I may say something. For us, it's not reduction, but simply aligning with American hours. Operationally speaking, it's very difficult to have one country, the U.S. or Canada, open while the other border is closed. So we always try to work in alignment with our partners at the borders. And they also try to work in alignment with us. We have about 30 entry points, and it's about 2 trucks per hour. And we could share the analysis with the committee. But it's really a matter of security to have a partner on the other side of the border and to move our employees to ports where there are higher risks because of the volume. Yes, we'll share that information.